Hello, hi, how are ya? This is Alex. I am the host of the Tap In Tap Out podcast, where we tap into discussions around mental wellness and spirituality and tap out of the patterns that no longer serve us. Amen? Amen. Okay. I'm at the point where the tagline is like, it's fine to read it, but when I say it out loud, I'm like, I'm going to say this every time I open the podcast up, but for right now, we'll still do it. How y'all doing? First of all, I'm doing pretty good actually today. I got to sleep in. Actually, before we get anywhere, I want to thank you all so much for supporting the first episode of the podcast. It means so much to me. You guys wouldn't even know how many like inner demons I had to fight to open up myself to start recording and putting stuff out there. So any kind of love or support that I read definitely goes a very long way. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you for positive and negative. I get much negative feedback, but thank you for any feedback you gave. I'm really excited for where we're headed. And yeah, any support you give just helps a ton emotionally. So I appreciate that a lot. But yeah, I'm doing okay. I feel like these past few weeks have been like super long, but also where did February go? You know? I've been really wanting like just 2 days where I have nothing to do and I don't have to worry about anything, but it's not going to be anytime soon. So I'm just trying to find small pockets of time to like rest and like recharge, but it's been kind of hard. But anyway, let's get to the show. First of all, thank you for submitting stuff to the inbox. I deeply appreciate it. This is one of my favorite things to plan when I was making the podcast was the inbox. So I really appreciate you guys being a part of that. We do have a question this week from a listener. But before we get into that, I just want to reiterate from last episode that I am not a licensed professional, but I can tell you what I would do or what I think about a certain topic or a certain thing, just for legal reasons. But yes, the question of the week from the inbox is, how do you feel parents should be showing up for their young adults? And that could be emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually, etc. So I really appreciate this question, honestly, the time that it came, because this is something that I personally obviously deal with as a young adult with parents. And honestly, I won't go too much into it, but I think the way the question is structured honestly helps answer itself. Specifically where it says like showing up. I feel like a lot of the times it's hard for parents and like just guardians in general. This could also be for like mentors, but I feel like when we're like young people, like babies, we need to be directed, we need to be taught how the world works. And after a while, it can be hard to transition into a position where you're in a supportive role for your child or for your person. But I feel like the word or the language of showing up in itself is really helpful because it's not about dictating what your steps should be, but showing up and being there in support for whatever your child like wants to be in that moment, you know? So like emotionally, I feel like communication is really important for all these things, honestly, physically and financially, especially. Like communication is so important because we all have different situations right now. And I feel like it's important to take an assessment of one, like where are you at as the young adult and what do you need? And and what do your parents have and what do they need, and where can you two meet each other, you know? And so I feel like you can't really show up if you don't know where you are, you know, or where you're going. So I think having that initial intake of like, okay, like this is what I need from those around me, and this is what my parents are at. And sometimes you won't get understanding of what that is until you actually ask your parents what that is. Like where are they at with you even, or with themselves, um, financially especially, but also like emotionally and physically. Like for me, I have younger brothers, so I think I realized sometime last year that like my parents are still being those stronger influences and those stronger guides to my younger brothers, but they're having to balance like being a new type of parent for me. And so it's going to require myself to communicate what I need, because they're not going to maybe have the nuance to maybe know off the bat, like, oh, Alex kind of needs this now instead of that. You know, when a certain thing worked for maybe half my life, it might not work for the next half of it, you know? So it's really important to have this conversation with your parents. And it's honestly a privilege to have the conversation. I feel like a lot of people don't get to have those conversations, but I feel like life kind of teaches us on the way there. And I think it deeply depends on your circumstances. Like, are you in college? Are you going to college? Are you trying to work? Like, are you working in the same area that your parents live in? Like, all these things will dictate how your parents can show up for you. And so I can't say like there's one way every parent should always show up for their child every single day of the year. But I think that the idea of showing up is a really important theme to have, because you hopefully, obviously it's like a Western, maybe like too Western of an idea, but as somebody who's becoming a young adult and attaining their own individuality, like you want to be able to, I don't know, like have the social support that you need to thrive. And so with your parents being willing to show up for you, you should be able to dictate and communicate what's most helpful and in what way is showing up going to be the most effective for you. And so I really can't answer like how someone should be showing up, because really it starts with you and taking an assessment of what you need and why, and almost why you need it too. So yeah, hopefully that made any sense. If you have a question for the inbox, please email heartofshema@gmail.com. It's going to be in the description, or you can DM the Heart of Shema Instagram page. I feel like at least once a week on the Instagram, I put up a little question poll too. So if you don't want to email, you can always answer that poll every week and submit your questions or comments, and it will probably be read on the podcast. I am kind of excited for the tap-in, so I'm going to take a quick break, and then when we get back, we are going to do the tap-in of the week. All right, we are back. It is time for the tap-in of the week. If you could not tell by the title of this episode, we are talking about the Four Agreements, the book. No room for surprise here this week, but this kind of came about in a comical way. So basically, I bought this book, or ordered the book, at the start of this year, with the intention of reading it and the intention of doing an episode about it if after I read it, I thought it'd be good for episode, right? And so I ordered the book, came in a week, did not touch it for weeks. I had some intention to read it in January, but very little, I'll be honest, very little intention to pick it up. I was really waiting for like more February, March. However, I attended counseling this week or last week with Fanta, my therapist, and I had a situation that was kind of happening to me. And so I was telling her about it, and not to like expose myself, but essentially I was dealing with a relationship that I was struggling with because I was kind of assuming things that maybe weren't true, and those assumptions were like affecting my like mental health. And so I was like kind of overthinking everything, and it's honestly a theme of my life, And so that sparked some anxiety for me, honestly. And so it was trying to get some, just talk it out with her. And she was super helpful. And at the very end, she was like, read the four agreements. And it just kind of came out in a weird, it was almost weird how she said it, because I don't really get homework in counseling. I know for some counselors, they prioritize like doing homework when you like aren't in your session, but I don't know if it's a me thing or it's the way that she does it, but I don't really get a lot of homework, and I've never gotten a book recommendation before, and I've been with her for like 2 years. And so she told me to read the four agreements. I was like, because I had just made a little episode timeline, like an outline for myself, and I had this plan for like next month, and I was like, oh, but I told her like literally of all the books you could have said, I'm trying to read this book next, but I was gonna wait a few weeks, and she was like, you need to read that like sooner than that, and I was like, okay, Fanta, I'm gonna do that. And so that pushed me to read the book, obviously. And so after reading it, I thought it'd be a really good way to do an episode around it, because we'll get into it, but I really enjoyed the book, and I've seen this book all my life. It's in my my old my family house, or my house I lived in. It was on the bookshelf. Like I saw it when I was cleaning, and I just assumed that it was like an old adult book, like not for me. For years, I don't know when this book came out. I should have done research before this, but I don't know. I'm trying to see right now. Yeah, so copyright 1997. So before I was born. This book has been alive. And so I had no intention of reading this book, but I've always seen it around, especially in the mental health like arena, and like, I don't know, just kind of like books everybody's read. It's always kind of on that list. And so I think I had a feeling I'd read it at some point. I just didn't think it'd be this soon, but I'm really happy I did. So when it digs into the book, I am not going to talk about every little detail. I will talk about the actual four agreements, and an overall review of the book. However, I really encourage y'all to read yourselves. One, because this would be too long if I really broke down this book, but two, it gives you something to like look forward to after you finish reading or listening to the podcast. So yes, this book is by Don Miguel Ruiz. Hope I said that right. And it's called The Four Agreements. It's a practical guide to personal freedom. So I'm gonna take it roughly by chapter, because each chapter is an agreement. But chapter 1 kind of starts with some context, so we'll just get into that first and then dive into the four agreements. So chapter 1 is titled Domestication and the Dream of the Planet. And I won't talk about much of the real details about this chapter, but overall, it's talking about how the author, based on his practice and his teaching, or I guess his learning, kind of sees how the world is and how the world works. And so this idea of domestication is very similar to what we call like socialization. How like as we grow up, we learn who we are, but also like how we relate to the world around us, and like how to behave. And a big theme in all this is that it's kind of woo-woo, honestly, for a lot of people probably, but it's the idea that we're all kind of like dreaming, and this life is kind of this big collective dream we're having together. And in this dream, we are creating these laws and these rules and how this dream works. And this domestication of ourselves is the idea that how we're conforming to those laws and those rules, those like moral, compass things, which will inform how we behave with each other and with ourselves, right? So with this idea of being in this dream, and we each have our own dreams, but together we're also dreaming as a world, we are conformed to make these agreements about ourselves and the world around us. So, for example, he calls language like an agreement. So like we all agree that a laptop is a laptop when we see a laptop. We all agree that when we read a book, we're reading a book, you know? And that's like just agreements that we have in order to live together. So I don't know why I didn't think about this before opening the book, but these 4 agreements are kind of his introduction of what it's like to introduce practical, insightful agreements into your life that will hopefully help manage the world of agreements that we all have as people. So essentially, we as people often make agreements that aren't necessarily serving our truest self. So when we grow up, we quickly realize that we have to present an image or an idea of ourselves that will fit how people want to see us. And so we have to make these agreements with ourselves on how we have to behave in order to be successful with the life that we're presented. So there's a quote from the book, actually. It says, like, with the fear of being punished and that fear of not getting a reward, we start pretending to be what we are not, just to please others, just to be good enough for someone else. So we've learned to live our lives to satisfy other people's demands. And so it was like relatable, obviously, to say the least. And quickly I realized why Miss Fanta wanted me to read this book, because I think it's something that I have struggled with pretty much all my life, just kind of managing my expectations from other people and allowing people's expectations and perceptions of me to dictate how I should live my life. So yes, soon into the book, page 4, I realized why I'm reading this book today. But the good news, apparently, via the author's words, is that if you view your life as a collection of agreements and you don't like your life, then you should change your agreements. So these 4 agreements aren't the only 4 that you'll need per se, but they will help you be able to break away from the old agreements that you've made to feel safe with who you are or who you think you are. So that's introduction that he gave, basically, of these 4 agreements. And when we go over them, they really, and it's kind of good because they really aren't anything that's like mind-blowing, but it's just, I think the way he presents them is just super digestible and like foundational. So even though it might not be mind-blowing information, like for me it was helpful to know, like, okay, like when I'm reading this, like what's something that I gravitate towards, what doesn't feel good when I read it, or what it kind of feels like triggering almost, and it kind of helps you see where you need work maybe. So the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word. And he says it's the most important one, but also the most difficult one to honor. So essentially, there is self-explanatory, but to be impeccable with your word is to understand the power that your words have over you, and also the power that people's words have over you. And that opinions are powerful. He gives an example of a girl who thinks she's ugly. So there's like a beautiful girl and her parents tell her that she's ugly, even though she's beautiful. And as beautiful as she might be, as long as she believes the opinion that she's ugly, she's going to think she's ugly. And this idea of her believing this opinion is an agreement she's making with herself. So he really takes this agreement concept and threads it throughout the book. So it's important to kind of get this, that like even though the opinion came from somebody else, she's agreeing with the opinion. So that agreement is with herself. It's not with her parents. Even though that's probably a separate agreement she's having, the agreement that's really affecting her is the agreement she has with herself. Because if she has the agreement that she's beautiful, even though people might tell her she's ugly, she'll believe she's beautiful because that's her agreement with herself. So it's pretty straightforward, but you can tell, like I could have told, that this is probably the hardest one to believe or the hardest one to kind of latch onto, just because how hard it is. Like, I think we are in a society that trains us to be open and be open to hearing people's opinions about us. That's how we know how to do well in life. And like, I don't even think that he's trying to say that from from a newborn we're supposed to be like this. I think he's saying that this is how the world is designed, but at a certain point you have to have an awareness that you can change the way that you move, you know. And so I think I appreciate that aspect of it, because it's not like a guilt of, oh my gosh, I spent all my life doing this wrong. It's that, no, like, you're not given a chance to do it right from the beginning. So now is your chance to see if you can make amends with yourself. So he breaks down like being impeccable as being without sin, because I think like peck is like sin and im is, you know, without. So impeccable is without sin. And he refers to sin as anything that goes against yourself. So by being impeccable, your words aren't going against yourself. He gave an example like in the street, I guess. So if I see you in the street, so like you who's listening, if I see you in the street and I call you stupid, even though it appears that I'm using the word against you, I'm really using that word against myself, because I'm giving you a reason not to like me, and you not liking me is not good for me. So I didn't mention this, but earlier in the book he talks about all of us being these mirrors to each other, right? And I think that idea kind of comes through in this example, because even though I'm projecting something onto you, or I'm casting some judgment onto you, it's really a reflection of what's going on inside of me. And so what he's trying to say is that even though what appears as somebody casting judgment on you, it's really just coming from themselves and like their agreement they're making with themselves. So once again, like, it really doesn't matter what someone else is saying to you if the agreements you have with yourself are serving you well and serving you the way that it needs to. Just like the girl who thinks she's ugly, if the girl's agreement is that she's beautiful, it doesn't matter if she's walking down the street and someone calls her ugly, because her agreement's gonna be that she's beautiful. So yeah, and he mentions in the chapter as well for this first agreement that the only way you can really break an old agreement is by replacing it with a new one. So you can't just like not agree with it and just walk away. Like, you have to have some idea of, okay, this isn't true, so what is true? And I think this kind of introduces the idea of like affirmations and like making the space to tell yourself things that are true as a way to like replace the negative self-talk that you might already be experiencing as a person. So that's the first agreement. The next one up is the second agreement, and it's don't take anything personally. He talks about a personal importance that we all have. Not all of us, but you know, that is a common theme in our lives. And this personal importance says that everything's about you, and we think that we're responsible for everything around us, you know? And so if somebody tells you something negative, then like about yourself, then it's probably something that you're doing that's causing that. That's what having a personal importance means. And so going back to this idea that we just talked about with the street example, he says that nothing others do is because of you, it's because of other people. So somebody casting judgment on you or somebody saying their opinion about you is never actually about you, it's about what's happening inside of them. And when we take something personally, we make the assumption that they know what's going on in our world. So that kind of called me out, because I'm good for like basing my actions on someone else's opinion of me when they don't know what's going on in my life, you know? And I don't know, like, honestly, I grew up thinking that people around you helped you understand who you were, you know? And I think that's, to some extent, that is, maybe there's some truth to that, but it was so unhealthy for me because I was in such a toss-up, being so scrutinized by my friends. I mean, I wouldn't call them friends, but being so scrutinized by my classmates that, like, I assumed that's how the world worked. I assumed people told you who you were. And so me being in, like, 6th grade, that was my mentality. Because at the end of the day, I'm getting beat up. So, like, I wasn't getting beaten up, like, physically that often, but definitely, like, emotionally and, like, socially getting beat up. Like, I truly thought that people told you how to be who you are. And so with that attitude, this was for me, reading this agreement, it was a callback to my younger self, honestly. And to make it even worse, at least not maybe for me, he talks about how even the good things that people tell you, you shouldn't take personally. So he goes on, I won't quote it, but he goes on and talks about how even when someone tells you you're wonderful, it's probably because they're in a good mood, and they like hearing themselves talk. They like hearing themselves say good things because they're feeling good. So they're telling you, girl, you look so good today. Like, it's because they're feeling good. And so even then, basically saying that, like, what should be encouraging you is what you tell yourself. You should not be relying on encouragement from people around you. It should be from the agreements you're making with yourself that are going to be uplifting and positive to you. And so, kind of going along with this, I'm in a class right now. We're talking about prejudice. The class is about, like, prejudice. And so I read a lot of research on prejudice, and something that we're learning is that people are more likely to be prejudiced to other people if they receive some negative judgment or evaluation right before they're asked to make a judgment about a person. So someone's more likely to cast a negative judgment on somebody if in the same moment or in the recent moment they were in some way, like, degraded, like self-esteem wise, you know? And that is a bit scary because it kind of means that, like, maybe a lot of the reasons why we attack other people or we aren't as nice with other people is what's going on inside of us. And I think we kind of want to believe that our judgments are always in a moral fairness when, like, how we're feeling in the moment is deeply informing not only how we're saying things, but what we're actually saying to people around us. And so what the author's trying to say is that, yeah, like, someone who's affirming you might just be feeling good that day, you know? And so, like, I don't think the issue is really receiving compliments, but it's, you can't rely or root yourself in other people's opinions about you because, girl, the weather will change that. Like, if it's raining that day, it might change that. And so, like, it's important to have social support, I think, but we can't root ourselves in people's opinions about us because it's just so arbitrary, like, how they could be feeling that day or that week. So yeah, that was kind of a wake-up call for me too. But moving on to the third agreement, it is don't make assumptions. So pretty straightforward. When we make assumptions, we believe that we're making the truth, right? And I think, at least he says, like, we're afraid of asking for clarification, which is true. As someone who makes lots of assumptions, like last week with my therapist, I could have avoided a lot of that situation just by asking for clarification, asking questions, but I did not. And so that just creates a spiral in my brain that I can't stop, you know? And so this chapter is all about communicating clearly. So you don't have to make assumptions about other people, right? And this comes up a lot for people like me who I don't often do this anymore, but I used to be the kind of person that would be like, oh, you should have known this X, Y, and Z. Like, if you really were my friend, you would know, blah, 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 blah. And that helps nobody because 10 out of 10, they never knew how to help me. But I somehow put that assumption on them that they could never meet because I never communicated that to them. And he makes this point that it's really not important if the assumption we make about somebody is correct. It just needs to be able to make us safe. And this is probably, like, the peak of the book for me because I think it's probably most relevant to me now more than ever. But for me personally, the issue with that, as not the issue with the statement, but my issue with with this statement is that sometimes for me, the safest thing that I do to myself is to degrade myself. And that's not good. Like, in a situation where I'm expecting something from somebody that they don't, what's the word? They don't fulfill themselves on. Like, instead of me saying, like, wow, that person sucks or that person is having a hard time, I'm gonna say, wow, like, what did I do wrong? What did I mess up with? I shouldn't have said that. Um, I'm doing too much, you know, like it's scary to think that it's not that I need that to be the right thing. It's that when I'm making a choice on who to put this blame to, I feel it most safe and most comfortable to put that on myself. And so really when it comes down to it, like it's helpful because that's the I can want to change that, you know? I think sometimes I have situations, actually the tap out this week will be related to this, but I have situations that I don't think are that bad, so I leave them alone. But when I hear stuff like this, it makes me want to change those things because I'm like, okay, that really does not sound like something that's going to serve me as a person. And so I really need to like tap out of doing this thing because it's no bueno, you know? So yeah, the third agreement chapter kind of, you know, schooled me a little bit, but the fourth agreement is supposed to be one that kind of sums it all up, or actually it's supposed to be related to the actions of the first three we talked about, but it's always do your best. So the fourth agreement is to always do your best. And so that's obviously in relation to the three past agreements. So always do your best in being impeccable with your word, in not making assumptions, in not taking things personally. Always do your best. And so he immediately talks about how your best will be different day to day. So physically, your mood's gonna be different. So like, he's not trying to say that every day you should be doing 100% of your capacity and your potential. But I think it's more of a quality thing where it's like, if you strive to be the best or do your best in all you do, you won't have room to judge yourself because you know you tried. And that's really all of this chapter is about. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but that's kind of the main synopsis of this chapter is like, once you do your best, yeah, like you're kind of free of judgment. And he's talking about this inner judge that we have. It's not about other people because like we said, we aren't accepting people's agreements about our lives anymore. So at this point, he's only talking about you and you. How do you relate to yourself? And so when you do your best, you don't have to prove anything else to yourself because you already did your best, you know? So in this chapter, action is mentioned a lot. Like this doing is really important. Because you can have like great dreams and ideas, but if you can't put action to them, then there won't be any results. And so he goes really deep into like the idea of having action with your words and action with your plans, because action is like the heart of doing life. And for example, like the best way to celebrate, honor your body is by doing your best to take care of it, you know? And I kind of gravitated towards this a lot because I have a hard time knowing like how to get the best out of life and stuff. But I think with this mentality, it's illuminating to me because it means that, yeah, like if I want to be really grateful and I want to be proud of myself, like I can sit here and write out a bunch of words about that and try to read it to myself, or I can do my life in a way that points to that, you know, and like have action behind that. And I think action is like really powerful because it's like material proof, you know. It's not just like, oh, I want to do that one day, or I think about doing that one day, or like I hope this will happen. Like when you have action behind your words or action in your life, like you can't deny yourself what you see in front of you, like what you've done. And so I think it's really important that he talked about like doing the best. And he also mentions that to do your best, you have to be yourself. So by not doing your best, you're denying yourself the right to be you. In other words, like when you are trying to like do the best or be the best, it's going to require a version of you that's authentic to who you are. It's not going to be somebody else. You know, like what's best for you is going to have to require you. And that was really powerful too for me. So that's overall what the book's about. I strongly encourage you to read it yourself. I intentionally skipped a lot of points in the book because I want to leave some surprises for y'all. But as of right now, when I think about which agreement is probably the hardest to follow, um, right now, I'm trying to look back and see. Um, it's probably not taking things personally on today, honestly, because I have a habit of, and it's not like uncommon, but I have a strong habit of navigating my life based on how people view me, you know? And like to the point where I'm trying to get better at this, but to the point where I wait to take opportunities until I think people around me are um think that I'm ready for it, you know? And that's not good either. If you listen to I put out a affirmation last week about purpose, and I kind of talked about that in the affirmation track. Um, but yeah, like sometimes in the past, like I've waited to go after my dreams because I need other people to believe in me first. When I have the idea, I should have the belief in me. What stopped me from going, you know? But if I can do better at not taking things personally from people, or needing that personal intake or that opinion from other people to move forward with things, one, I move a lot faster in my life, but two, like I build a better relationship with trusting my own self and trusting my choices, and that my choices are good and they mean something and they're worthwhile. So if you ask me next week, it's probably a different agreement, but today it's don't take things personally, or don't take anything personally. Um, Overall review of the book, I really liked it. If you have a hard time like sifting through cultural terms that maybe you aren't used to, still give it a try. Honestly, it's not that bad. Like he talks a lot about his cultural background. I think it's an ancient Mexican teaching and stuff like that. So if you're not comfortable with that kind of stuff, like I encourage you to open up some more. But it's pretty digestible, and the language he uses is very understandable. Um, almost kind of made stupid for you to follow. So I really recommend you read it. Um, if you want another recommendation, if you like books like this and maybe you've read it already, I have a book similar to this book. It's actually based on like ancient African teaching, but it's called The Spirit of Intimacy. It's by Sobonfu Some. It'll be in the description. But yeah, it's ancient African teachings in the ways of relationships. I read this last year during quarantine. We're still in quarantine, by the way, but during last year's quarantine, I was reading this book, and it's a really short read, a little red book. Took a few hours, but it was so fascinating to read someone else's interpretation of how relationships are supposed to work. And very similar to this book, I think this book would probably work best for you if you take it as a way to feel out where you're at with certain topics, certain themes in your life, you know? Like, or you could just take this book and live by it, because I think he's giving you a discipline to work from. But I feel like what's going to work best for me is reading this maybe now and seeing what's effective, what feels off, what feels really good, like what's something that I feel like, oh yeah, I do a good job at that, or what's something where it's like, oh, like I suck at that, you know? And then maybe a year from now, going back over my notes about this book and being like, oh, like I actually do a better job at doing that, or like I actually suck more at doing that. So I think it's a good way to kind of give yourself a gauge on where you're at with your interpersonal boundaries as a person. Something, I guess one critique I have about the book, honestly, and it's not very well thought out, but it's just super hard. He does make a note about this in the book in his defense, but something that kind of throws me off is just this idea of like fully being your own support and fully being your own voice of reason. And this might fully be just an Alex thing, but I have a hard time believing that somebody can actually do life this way fully, you know, where like all the things that they do, that they say, that they believe come from their own sense of self and their own self-esteem. And like he does say, I said earlier, like he talks about how like we grow up thinking that it's a certain type of way and we have to learn this way of living. But even after that, even let's say I did life like I'm right now, I'm doing life, and today I decide to follow the 4 agreements, like, it's just hard. And he says it's difficult. He's not saying like, all right, do this tomorrow and you'll be sad. He does say this could take years. However, even in some years, maybe I'm just thinking of myself too small, but I don't know if I'll be in a place where I can never assume stuff. I can never take things personally. And I don't think he's even trying to say that, like, because being perfect is something that he talks about in the book. But just the idea of striving for that just gives me some anxiety. So I think it's good to, like, in the moment of situations like I had last week, think back on these things and see if I can apply them in the moment. Do I commit myself to following these disciplines every single day when I wake up? Probably not, but maybe in a year or 10, maybe we get to that. If you read this book, please let me know if you think about it. If you listen to the podcast and then read it, still let me know what you thought about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the 4 agreements. Is there an agreement that you need to work on? Is there one that you think you mastered? Please let me know if anybody's mastered an agreement and how you did it, because I need some help. But that'll be it for the tap in this week. I'm gonna take a quick break and then do the small business shout out and then the tap out segment. This week, for the small business shout out, I was looking online for a bookstore to support because obviously it's a book episode. See what I did there? And I was looking around and I found an independent Black and woman-owned retail for designers, activists, and other thinking persons. It is called Shop at Matter. It's actually, I think, a business within a business. So the business is Matter Design. Located in Denver, Colorado, but they have an online store and they sell it all, I guess. Looking through this, they sell books, games like puzzles and stuff, art and office supplies, prints, home goods, pins, all the things. I think literally have a thing that says all the things. So they're selling everything. It looks really high quality. I looked up, they are selling the 4 Agreements book. If you're interested in buying it, please buy from Black-owned small business or any kind of small business, because Barnes & Noble has their money that they need. So if you're looking to buy the book, they also have, I looked it up, and there are other, like, accessories to the book. So there's, like, a deck, like a deck of cards you can buy. There's other installments of this book, too, from the author that you can look up. So, yeah, if you're gonna get your books from someplace that, will have it for you, please get into Shop at Matter. The next time I need a book to read, which is going to be very soon, I just finished this book, and I only have like 2 other books to read. But the next time I need a book, I'm definitely coming here first to look it up, because I need to do a better job personally of not buying my books from Amazon. So if you're interested, you can find them at shopatmatter.com. Or their Instagram is Matter Design. They have another Instagram for the actual shop, so Shop at Matter on Instagram. And yeah, check them out. Okay, it is now time for the tap out this week. This week I have an update from last week, or last episode. We talked about Subway employees, famously. If you weren't here for your last episode, basically I said I have a hard time getting my order right with Subway or other restaurants that involve options in food. So basically all restaurants. And I have a hard time correcting basically misunderstood orders in the moment. And so, yeah, I thought I was done with that. Not like done with it. Thought I was done talking about it. But this tap out for this week is going to be an extension or just maybe a new layer to this conversation, because something happened between last episode and now that brought something to my attention, and I have an update. So just getting into it, basically I had a meeting or like a casual yeah, casual meeting with somebody like a faculty member, like an old mentor type person. So I met up with them and we sat in a nice open area, like nice park, just setting the scene for you. Birds are chirping, I'm having a good time. It's nice and warm out. Having a great time. So we're chatting it up and they asked me what my plans are this year, like after I graduate and stuff. And so I tell them and they misheard where I told them I was going or where I planned to like move. And I didn't really realize the first time they mentioned it. Cause you this is where it gets bad. When someone tells you something and like you didn't fully hear them, but you just trust that like what they said is right. So I said, yeah, I said that. And we're in masks. So keep in mind this is definitely a factor in this conversation. We're wearing masks. And so I'm like, yeah. Like, And so later on in the conversation is when I actually realized that they misheard me. And so they start talking about another place that I didn't talk about. Mind you, it was in the same state. So in terms of damage control, I thought I would be fine. And for two reasons. One, well, really only one good reason. Quote unquote good reason. The only good reason why I thought it would be fine was because after this conversation, it wouldn't matter, And then as she was talking to me, I was like, yeah, like, she won't know anything about it, or like, but she just so happened to have experience in the area that she thought I told her. So really this conversation turned into her trying to like help me and like, give me some good mentoring. And like, I appreciated it, like any help I can get, but it was kind of futile because she misheard what I told her. And had I told her she was, she misheard me and corrected her, she wouldn't be wasting her breath telling me information that isn't going to actually benefit me where I'm going. So I sat through an hour plus conversation. I didn't tell her once that she was wrong. And I'm embarrassed. And I'll be honest, this was post episode 1. So I had talked about the sandwich thing and I want to be better. I set an intention in the episode to be better and I stepped into this situation. Simple man, okay? And I can be honest and say that it did not cross my mind once to correct her. Like as soon as I heard that she misheard me, I let it go. And so it wasn't until she left that it all kind of dawned on me that this is exactly what happens with my sandwiches. But what I failed to realize the first time I talked about this is that part of why I let this happen time and time again is because I treat them as one-off things. Like, it's just one sandwich, it's just one soup, it's just one Chipotle bowl. But really, it's a pattern. And you know what's funny? I made this podcast myself, and I made these ideas with the intention of growing as a person. And of course, life would just organize itself to whip me into shape because the reason why I didn't want to tell her she was wrong or that she misheard me was because I thought it'd be a one-time thing. But when I tell you, she's like even more encouraged to want to help me because she thinks she knows where I'm going. I was embarrassed because now I have to keep this lie going. I thought it would be like a one-time meeting, but she was like, yeah, so hit me up, 2 or 3 weeks, we can get coffee again. And I'm like, oh, I really messed this one up. Because I was okay with this being wrong for the hour I thought we were gonna have and that be it. Just as I think it's okay to have one sandwich taste poor, one sandwich be too spicy because I put too much jalapenos in it. But what I'm learning as a person in this moment, being vulnerable, is that these things might appear to be one-off things, but they're actually feeding into the patterns that's, it's making them grow and making them be consistent. Like, each time that I don't correct myself on a sandwich, it's setting myself up to make that mistake again. And so there's probably some very obvious link to this with the 4 agreements I'm not going to go into because I don't got the mental agility right now. But it seems to me like in the moment, I need to make better choices because I might think they're singular and not really affecting each other, but really they are. And I think, honestly, the sandwich stuff influenced how I talked to this faculty member. And I just feel embarrassed inside. Like, she'll never know. She will never know that she thinks she's right. However, I have to live with that, and I don't like that. So my tap out this week is simply an extension of last week or last episode. Doing a better job at stopping things in the moment, because they are gonna affect future things that happen. Even if it might even be outside of what you're dealing with. So it can go from sandwiches to faculty dates. So yes, that's the topic for the week, and that is the end of the episode. So thank you so much for tuning in. My social medias are just Alex Today on IG and Twitter. You can follow Heart of Shema on Instagram for the podcast updates. Send your questions to heartofshema@gmail.com. Please submit to the inbox. It's lit up in there. If you have a small business you want to promote, send to the podcast, send to my DM. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Google Podcasts, all the places, really. If you go on Anchor, you can find all the different podcast platforms it's on. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts. If you listen from Apple, I'm talking to you. Please rate and review 5 stars. It helps us a lot in this game. So please rate and review. That'll be it. So I'm gonna see y'all next time for Tap In, Tap Out.